Tonight I'm out in the shed pretty late. It's 10 to 8, haven't had dinner yet, but I've been in town Monday this week and I have to be in town tomorrow and Thursday, so it means I don't get much shed time, so I'm sort of out here making the most of it. In order to replace the oil seal, I need to make something that lets me pull off the flywheel. So this is off the spare engine. These are the coils for the generator. There's the 3 coils, and this is the flywheel that goes onto the end of the crankshaft, obviously. And there's a thread on there. So to get this off, you have a tool that screws on there, and there's a bolt in the end that pushes on the end of the crankshaft. You put another piece over the end of the crankshaft to protect that. So that's what I need to make. And the club actually has these tools, you can buy them. But I thought, I've got a lathe, I might as well try making one. And the dimensions are all in the forum, so you can look them up. That's more or less what it looks like. And I happen to have this steel bar that's, the outside diameter isn't too critical, I think, but the inside diameter is, because you need to thread it. And it turns out that this piece of bar I've got has exactly the right inside diameter somehow, or very, very close. I'll probably need to take a skim cut off that with a boring bar, but then I can thread the end. So I started looking at setting up my lathe to do the threading. It's a 26 TPI Whitworth thread. 26 shows you what gears you need. I don't have those. So I had to go back to my old trick, which is 3D printing some. I'm just going to print them from PLA, which doesn't last a long time, but it should last long enough for me to do that one little ½ inch of thread. So I am printing one of the gears now. That took forever to get working. For some reason my computer was on a go slow, but I finally got that to start working. And while that's printing, I've come out here and I've been working on the throttle cable. Clean up as I go. To replace the old manky one that was way too long as well. So I've made a new cable based on a universal cable kit, and I used the measurements from the club supplied ones and just kind of made it the same. I reused the original sort of adjuster that goes in the middle. I wasn't quite sure what that does, but that takes up some of the slack. So that reduces the slack in the throttle before it starts to do anything. So I've got that set up. I may still need to adjust this a bit. I've routed it through here, which seems to be what these are for, and that keeps it away from the bars as they move, so nothing interferes with the cable. It kind of moves with them. I may end up just cable tying that down there or something, because this is the length of the club ones, as I say. I think maybe on some bikes there's an extra shield thing here, and it sort of goes through a hole in the side of it, something like that. So I'll have to see exactly how that works, but testing it out, just a little bit. Turn the bars lock to lock. It's not affecting the cable pull, so I'm pretty sure I'll be able to sort of tie that down like that. Like that, so you can see. And I think this is how these bikes are. The throttle doesn't spring back. So, like, it's a bit hard to see when it's under a sheet, but the throttle on this bike springs back. But I think on these it doesn't. There's an adjuster there, a little friction thing. I think it still needs a bit of adjustment. But I always disconnect both battery leads to make sure it's really disconnected and I haven't forgotten. But, that should work. You have to be really careful you remember to put all the little end pieces on before you solder the ends on. I used the ferrule that came on the end of the universal kit, fitted the carburetor, so that end was fine, and this end I unsoldered and reused the little brass thing. The only thing I did forget to put on was the little rubber boot, which then I had a bit of a struggle pushing that on afterwards, but that just keeps it all neat and tidy up that end. Yeah, I think this will be able to be looped down through here somehow, and that keeps it all out of the way. So that's good. That's the fuel shut off. And I think that's all I can really do tonight. My printing hasn't finished. I'll have to go inside. I'll have to come out and shut that all down tonight when it's finished printing, probably in another half hour. But that's probably, I'm not going to get too much more done this week, unfortunately. It's been quite a long week at work. Been into the city a couple of times this week, 3 times I think, and so I haven't had much chance to do much in the evenings. But I did 3D print a couple of change gears. This is just PLA. It's not going to last a long time, but it lasted long enough to do the threads I needed to do on this flywheel puller. So I've just noticed I didn't have one of them clamped down properly, but that all held enough to do the thread I needed, which is a 26 TPI thread, inside thread on there, which screws down onto this thread on the flywheel, chamfered the outside so it clears the rivets, and a tiny bit on the inside so it clears the curve at the bottom of that thread. So that should now, this is done tight. This piece of tube already had the big hole in it, which made it easier. So this, my thread is a little bit sloppy. I overshot it a little bit, but I think it should be good enough. That threads onto there. What I need to do now is make an end piece. I'll weld that on. I'll machine it so it's central, and that has a 1/2 inch hole bored through it. And you put a bolt through that, which is what goes down and presses on the end of the flywheel, the crankshaft here. But you need to make a little piece that threads onto there, because you don't want to ruin that little depression on the end of the crankshaft there, because that's what you use to put this between centers to rebuild the crank to get it centered. This one already looked like it had been damaged a little bit, so hopefully it's okay. But that little protector piece screws on there. I wonder if you could do it so it doesn't screw on. Could you just make it so it just slides on? I don't know why it has to thread on, because the idea is it just pushes on that. I guess because you want to push on the thread, not on this end piece. Well, there is a shoulder there, but I'll see if I can do the thread. Obviously, I've proved I can cut the threads, and I hopefully have the right change gears for that, and if I don't, I can print them. But I need to make that little piece, and then the bolt goes on there, and that's what pulls this off the taper, theoretically. Yeah, I overshot that thread just a little bit, I think. It's a little bit loose, but it's quite a fine thread over a big diameter. I think it's 1 1/8 inch 26 TPI Whitworth. So I keep this on the flywheel so you don't lose the magnetism in the flywheel. But now it's time to go in again, so I'll leave all of this till the morning. It's the weekend now. When I did come in yesterday, the bike had been sitting for 2 days, and I did crank it over, and it literally fired on the first pull. So now I've got the throttle sorted out. You can give it a tiny bit of throttle and it'll stay there. And that was enough to basically fire it up. So that must be set pretty close. We'll see a bit more when I actually get on the road and it's running. I'm still waiting for the parts, the clutch and front brake cable from the UK, but I did get some other parts from the UK today, which is some of the wiring stuff, the bullets and things. I did buy a bag of these little push-on type connectors where you sort of poke the wire through and the pigtail, the ends of the wire, just wrap around and that gets pushed into the little clips. That's for these things. Well, this one, I think. And I got a bunch of bulbs. So I've got the little pilot bulbs, 12 volt headlamp bulbs. I mentioned these are the same as the Riley, so I got extra spares since I was paying for the shipping anyway. And I think I mentioned that's the oil seal we need to replace on the front end. So hopefully this puller will work once I've got this all sorted out. But yeah, that'll be this weekend's job. The other very small job I did was JB welded the little Miller switch knob back together. I think that should work okay. And I just, it's got a 1/8 roll pin through there. I made the hole for that a little bit sloppy as well, just so I can get that pin out relatively easily without breaking it again if I ever need to. Hopefully I don't need to. That's the off position there. And when you pull the key out, that just sort of rotates around. It doesn't do anything. It's quite interesting how that works. I mean, you could steal that with a screwdriver, but I don't think that's really what it's there for. Yeah, I think I'll clean up this mess tomorrow. Might be time to invest in a new chip brush. That one's getting a little bit short. I think I've had that since I got my first lathe, which was ages and ages ago. It's the weekend again now, and I came out here super early this morning. I think it was still dark, about 7 o'clock. And it was a bit chilly, so I actually put the diesel heater on for the first time this year, mainly just to see if it would work, and it fired straight up, so that was good. But I came out to finish my flywheel puller. So I'd machined this part last night. This morning I machined this top piece it's kind of a top hat piece, so it fits down into this tube, and it was drilled and tapped for a 1/2 inch bolt, and I TIG brazed that into place. The way this works is this is the end of the crankshaft. The flywheel is on a taper down there, and there's a spacer and then this nut that tightens it all up. The flywheel isn't keyed in any way, so when you put it all back together you have to make sure you line it up properly, but that'll be a problem for when I actually get it apart and then change the seal and put it back together. But the way this works is there's another tool that screws on the end here, and I kind of messed up a little bit here. Turns out it's the same thread pitch, 26 TPI, but 9/16. So I turned up this little piece and did some more thread cutting. The thread cutting on a little lathe like this is always a bit difficult. So I had to set the angle 27.5 degrees, and you have to be really careful with your operations. So you sort of bring it in, set the angle here when it's like this to cut down the thread, and you engage it, let it come in, and then you sort of back the tool off one turn, wind it out, back it back in, wind it on a bit. So if you get distracted, it's really easy to get that operation wrong, the order of operations. And I accidentally wound it on twice and went to cut the thread and broke my tool. So that was my little cutting tool. I was right near the last couple of passes and broke the end off. Luckily I have another one, and I was able to line all of that up carefully and finish off the last couple of passes on the thread on that. This is supposed to be closed. It's supposed to be like a blind hole. I forgot that and drilled it all the way through. So that screws down tight. It actually comes up against the shoulder. I was looking at putting a couple of flats on it so you could get a spanner on it, but I find you can I can do it up tight enough by hand. And I machined a little button to go in the end, because I figure with a puller like this, where you're using a bolt to go down onto something, something has to slide, because this is rotating. So I figure make that a separate piece, put a bit of oil on it when I actually pull this apart, oil around there, oil on here, so that something can slip. But the way this works is, start of the thread, that thread's on there, it comes down hard against the face, that's why there's a big chamfer on it to clear the rivets, and then it's not done up hard yet, but then of course you just do up the bolt, which pushes on the end of the crankshaft, and it should pop the flywheel off the taper. That's the idea. The flywheel will come loose, then of course you have to take this off. You can see that this flywheel is loose because it was never on there properly anyway. Take this off, and then you could unscrew this, which will be tight. That might be where I need the flats on it, but if I need to grip it with mole grips, that's okay. Doesn't matter if the outside of this gets mangled. This is high tensile steel. I think this is only mild steel, so hopefully that's going to be good enough, but we'll see. And then that should be enough to pop the flywheel off without damaging this, because this is another taper, which is what the advanced retard mechanism goes on, and there's also a thread in the end there, which is the bolt that holds all of that in place. So what I need to do now is take apart the front of the bike, the generator cover, pull all of that off, and then see if I can get this flywheel off. When you put the flywheel back, you need to chock the crank. The service manual actually says you could do it by putting the bike in gear and standing on the brake, or locking down the rear brake. The problem is, because this crankshaft is sort of pushed together onto the pins, if you try to do it that way, there is a danger that you can twist the crankshaft out of alignment, apparently. I'm not quite sure how, because it is doweled, it's pinned. But apparently the safest way to do it is you take the sump off and you put a wooden block against this front crank web. I guess it goes in against that, so that when you do the nut up, that'll be the other side, that side. So when you do the nut up, this isn't going to turn. That's the way it's recommended on the forum. So I'll do it like that, which means taking the sump off, draining the oil, all that kind of business. And then, yes, the other problem is getting it lined up. So there is a tool for that as well, which I also don't have, but I could probably make. There are instructions for that. That kind of bolts, I think it bolts across the front of the engine, and there's a pin that goes through and engages with this little hole. But other people say you can do it just by lining this up. You have to get the engine set to top dead center, which I think I should be able to do. I might actually make some sort of little gauge thing that goes down through a spark plug hole, because I've got plenty of spark plugs. So I can put a DTI on it, so you can get exactly top dead center, and then you line this up with a little hole here, and then you know this is in the right place. But I think next thing is pull apart the front of the engine. I think the other thing I need to make is I'll have to 3D print a little, there's another tool that centers this, because this is held under a plate with 3 screws, and I think that can move around. So what you need is something to centralize this, so that when you put the flywheel back on, this is all central, because this is what the oil seal is running on. I should mention it was super handy having a spare engine, so I could test these threads were correct on a spare crank and a spare flywheel. I've got the plate with the coils on it off, so now I think what I need to do, you can see the oil inside there, so I need to get that nut off, that spacer, and then I thread this back on the end, and then the puller. So I think I'm going to use an air impact to see if I can pop that nut off. So that nut came straight off. I had to tap the spacer with a hammer just to loosen the grease around it, and then that slides off. So now this should I think I need my flush pliers. I should be able to get that done up tight. I should probably actually clean the threads first, and then I will use the puller and see if I can get the flywheel off. Apparently these can be quite hard to get off. It may end up needing to be left overnight with tension on it. That seems to work for some people, and then you tap it with a hammer and that just breaks the taper. I managed to get the flywheel off. That wasn't too bad. I did use the air impact wrench and a couple of taps with a hammer, and it did come off eventually. You can see it's quite rusty on there. But then I had another problem, which was the air impact might have been a bit too much for this, and I couldn't unlock this from the flywheel. Now the problem there is this is on the engine. You've got that on there to protect that thread, and obviously this has to be bigger than this boss to push on it, because that's what you're pushing on to pop the flywheel off. So that means with this on there you can't remove the flywheel because this stops you pulling it off the shaft. So that was very tricky. In the end, what I had to do was I was able to grip the flywheel with these like that, and use the mole grips on the outside of this to get enough of a grip on it to be able to undo it. So this could probably do with flats being machined on it as well. But the flywheel's off now, and yeah, you can see that oil seal is knackered. There's oil all through there. So what I need to do is take that off, and I need to measure it. I need to measure the inside diameter of the seal and the outside diameter of this boss, and then I can 3D print a little centering sleeve. That face looks good, so that should all go back together okay. I'm going to put this back on the coils because I don't want this to lose any magnetism. I don't know how long that takes to happen, but best not to take any chances, I guess. If I can get that back on there. So now I guess I pull the front off and get that little oil seal out. We'll have a look at it, see how mangled it is. This is the little oil seal carrier. There's the seal in there. Yeah, that's dead. You can see the cracks in it, and it's super hard, so it doesn't feel tight on there at all. It's not sealing at all. And the gasket just fell apart. It's the remains of the gasket. So I'll get that seal out, I'll tidy that up, and like I say, I'll measure these dimensions and figure out what little 3D printed sleeve I need in order to keep all this centralized. I 3D printed a little centering tool. That's the little white piece there. It took me 3 goes to get it right, to get the taper right and the outer diameter right, but that means that seal is now centralized. I may just check that there. Yeah, I'll make sure that's clean. It's pretty polished. There's no marks or anything on the boss. So now I should be able to pull that little centering tool out, put the spacer on, and put the nut back. Also underneath here there's a dished washer, so I'm going to need to pull that off with pliers. There's a dished washer that has to go on the right way around, and while I was waiting for the print I did mill some flats on this one so I can get a big spanner across it if I need to turn it. And I also took apart an old spark plug and made a little top dead center finder thingy, which is, I unscrewed the middle of the spark plug, drilled it out. This tube's just a push fit at the moment. I'm going to fill this up with epoxy. This little tube goes in, there's a collar so it won't drop all the way down. It's actually really handy for figuring out not only top dead center but when you're on the compression stroke, because it shoots the little pin out. So now I know I'm on the right stroke, and if you turn the engine over slowly this will just lift off. So I should be able to get a DTI on the end of that. You do have to be a bit careful because it's at such an angle it can jam the piston. So you just have to take it easy with that thing. But the manual talks about a little smear off sealer on the end of this, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to see if I can get this all back together. You need to get top dead center pretty close, which means sort of putting this plate back on, making sure the little dowel hole is lined up, and that's so that you can reset the timing later. Yeah, there's a little bit of oil there still, but I've cleaned up all inside there, cleaned up all inside this, the back of this as well. And oh, that's right, there was a little piece of insulation that has broken off up there, so I may just stick a little piece of I've got some like fish paper type stuff, so I might super glue a little piece of that on there. It's just to make sure this doesn't touch the outer housing. It shouldn't anyway, but I'll just replace that. This is all back together again now. I just don't have haven't got the front cover on yet, but that's all back together. That was a real pain to do. I had to take off this exhaust pipe just to drop the sump, and then they say it's best to block one of the crank webs with a piece of wood, which is all very well and good when the engine's up on a bench, but when you're trying to work from underneath and you can't see what you're doing, that was very difficult, trying to get that piece of wood up into the right place to lock the crank web. But I got there eventually. I did use the rattle gun just to do up the nut really tight. Flywheel didn't move on the taper, which is good, and I went back and I checked the top dead center again, checked the timing again. This should be ready to fire up. I've put the oil back in, sump's all done up. The idea with the sump was I'm pretty sure I wanted the gasket to stick to the sump and come off the body, but it didn't do that. It did it the other way around. So I cleaned any goop off the flange of the oil pan, and then I had to wash the whole thing out. And I just smeared some grease on it when I put it back together, so hopefully next time I need to take it apart the gasket won't stick to it at all. That grease should stop it sticking. Some of the bolts were a little bit loose, so I need to remember to go back and tighten them once everything's been running a little bit. But let's see. That's the fuel on. I also just noticed I never put hose clamps around these little blocking brass things that I put in. I need to do that as well. But if we give it a choke, let's power. Let's see if it's going to start. Shouldn't be in gear. Spark plugs are back in place. Should have oil pressure. Let's see. I need to make a little linkage to close the choke clutch. I was also going to put a little piece of rubber hose around this so it doesn't rub against the bottom of the cylinder head. Got oil pressure? Yep. Not sure I may have done that bolt up again, too tight again. It has to be really loose, otherwise it crushes the advanced retard unit and that stops working. It's a bit of a strange little thing. So I don't know what stops that coming apart. It is sticking. There we go. Replace all these wires, of course. That main power wire, the insulation is all cracking, and there was actually a bare patch on it, which luckily hadn't been shorting out. So one of the reasons that the throttle on this doesn't spring back, it's kind of sticky. That's because you have to take your hand off the throttle to change gear. So it's a right-hand gear shift. Still don't have the clutch, otherwise I try and put it in gear. Oil burning off the exhaust because it's basically been covered in oil all day, so everything I've touched has got oily. Just really put a little drip tray under there, see if it has actually fixed the leak. I'm sure it has. That original oil seal was shot. Yeah, there's no oil there. It would take a while for it to leak out and accumulate down there, I would think. Don't see any leaks. You have to remember I've already burnt myself on the exhaust a couple of times. You have to remember it gets hot. So I think what I will do is turn the fuel off, put a little piece of cardboard or something underneath there overnight and see if anything leaks out during the night. And I think what I'll do is put a little dob of Loctite on that advanced retard adjuster screw thing, because it's only just finger tight. Yeah, I can undo that. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe I need a better lock washer on it. I don't think it would come undone. Yeah, that doesn't seem quite right. I'll look in the parts book and see if there's meant to be a spring washer or something under there. So all I can do now, I could start doing the wiring, but I'll probably wait. I need to do the footboards and then I can get those bolted back on. Sunday, No leaks under the bike. That's really good. I expect something will leak once it's actually up and running and gets warmed up. I went out this morning and bought some cable to do the wiring loom when the time comes. It was just from Super Cheap Auto. It's 10 amp and 15 amp cable. I kind of matched the existing loom for the thickness of the wire. And I've got the air compressor on because I'm using my little sanding thingy to grind through the welds. Basically these footboards are two pieces and they're welded together along the seam, but not all the way along, just in some places. So that means I've been able to go around and grind it until I can separate the two halves, one of which is full of dirt and grease and stuff. And now hopefully that means I can panel beat these, not to be perfect, just to be cleaner, and then I should be able to weld them back together. The welds get a bit close to some of these holes. You can see it's got a bit thin there because that's how far down I had to go to break through the welds. But yeah, that looks like there was a creature living in there. So I'll do the other one as well. You can see these are both pretty mangled. This is the good one. But hopefully I can get them back to some semblance of straight. I did have a look today as well for the sort of striped rubber that gets stuck onto these. You can see this has had stuff glued to it before, but I couldn't find the right pattern, so I'll have to keep looking for that. But let's see if we can get these cleaned up at least. I've been bashing around with these footboards and they're getting straighter. I was trying to remove the old glue. I've tried lacquer thinner, that worked reasonably well. Petrol kind of worked. Nothing else really seemed to dissolve it. So I've wiped it down with that, and I ended up using a wire brush on a drill just to try and get rid of most of it. There's still a little bit of it there, but these have cleaned up okay. They're pretty battered. And I'm still doing some work to get the edges to all line up again nicely. You can see they sort of fit back together. These are just stamped out, pressed out. It's still a bit low there, need to just pull that in. Same with this. But I think what I'm going to do is soak these in phosphoric acid overnight, because there's quite a bit of rust on the inside and I want to get rid of most of that, and then that'll get them nice and clean. Before I weld them back together, I'll paint the inside. Maybe I'll use zinc rich primer and then some other sort of paint, or maybe I don't want to use rubberized stuff, probably just the zinc welding primer. And then there's little holes, they're actually drain holes, but I can sort of flood the inside of that with penetrol or something like that to seal them. I'll be able to weld the edges, I'll be able to weld in different places, but I'm going to need to fix a whole bunch of cracks on them first. Sort of crack there, big crack at the front, cracks all along here. Again, we're not aiming for perfection because it's an old beat up bike, but I want them to be relatively straight and relatively flat. It's got a little bit of, I think this was the worst one, and it's got a bit of stretch in it, so there's a bit of oil canning in there. But once it's all welded together, they'll go nice and solid again. I hope. And then I'll give them a quick coat of black paint, and I'm going to try and find that right rubber sort of material that gets glued on here. It's sort of ribbed stripy rubber, so we'll have to see where I can find that from. But a little bit more hammer and dolly work. I'm using various things. My railway track works pretty well. It's quite good having the curved corners on the top. Doesn't leave sharp creases on things. I've used my shoe last to get into some corners, and I've used this thing, sort of stake dolly. I mean, it's just a bit of steel welded to a piece of round bar, but it works pretty well. So a little bit more of that, and I had to use my sliver off my steel block. That works really well getting in places like that. You can see this is all still wavy, but once it gets close enough I'll hammer the two sides together because they need to be fitting tight for when I weld them, and I'm just going to do the same as they did, just in different places. So I'll just put little beads of weld, just fusion weld the two edges together, and that's enough to hold it, and it'll lock it all in place. I'm not too worried about painting these because they're covered with the rubber, so you don't really see it, and they should go in there like that. So they're so low down you don't see the underneath, so that won't matter if that's all nicely painted. Well, horribly painted, but painted. And the edges I think will just look better with a bit of paint, because of course these run close to the ground, so these are the most likely things to rust. But a little bit more smoothing out and then they can go in my big tank. It's already got water in it. I'll just put a little bit of phosphoric acid in there and that'll just take care of the surface rust, give me a nice surface for repainting it. With a couple of clamps either end, I'm able to get these edges fitting relatively nicely. Once I weld it, of course, I'll clamp it all together really tight. I can also use this to, on a flat surface, hammer those corners together like that. So sort of knock it down and then knock them sideways. And you can see that gives a pretty nice tight fit. So I should be able to get these sort of tacked together pretty nicely. This one you can see isn't quite right. This is before I've done this with it clamped together. You can see how the edges don't come together nicely. These have definitely taken a few scrapes and things. That bit's still low. Might need to hammer that out. I'll do the second one and then we'll put it in the acid bath. This is where I'm going to finish up for the weekend. It's sitting in the phosphoric acid. It's very weak, but it'll take the surface rust off, I think, especially if I give it a bit of a scrub. And I can then spray it down with a slightly stronger solution. You can see the inside of them look like they were primed. There's the grey primer, and you can see where the black paint has run down inside there. They obviously hung them up by those holes at the end to paint them. And the reason why there are 4 holes, even though there are only 2 mounting bolts, is so that they didn't have to be handed. I think they're both the same, so they'll fit either side, but the mounting holes are offset to one side or the other. And another weekend completely ignoring the Riley. Really have to get back onto that.